guys, how you doing? Alright, so I had a lot of interest in my video where I posted about people building bad combinations a lot of times. And I want to try to give you some information so that you can avoid doing that. Here's how I look at it. Basically, based on intake valve closing, okay, and I only say just that one event at this point because that's arguably the most important valve event. Yeah, it matters when it opens, it matters when the exhaust opens, it matters when the exhaust closes, and it matters how much it lifts. But intake valve closing will determine the shape of your power curve, in my opinion, beyond most other things. So, all things contribute, but that is the most important to me. So, I look at it this way. If you figure out where that intake valve closes, and if you're not familiar with camshafts, basically here's what happens. On an engine, internal combustion engine, intake valve opens, the piston drops down, intake valve closes, and the piston climbs up, and then you have compression, you have combustion, so you have your power stroke, the spark plug fires, it pushes the piston down. Now, exhaust valve opens, piston climbs up, exhaust valve closes, intake valve opens, piston drops, and we repeat the cycle, okay? That's how engines work. So, suck, squeeze, bang, blow, as we call it. So, if you're looking at the intake valve specifically, what is that number? What are we talking about? If we're looking at degrees, so it's degrees of crank rotation after bottom dead center, okay? And I say that almost always it's going to be after bottom dead center, meaning the piston has come all the way down to the bottom and is headed back up. Now the intake valve is going to close, because even though theoretically it should close at zero, and that works fine in an idle, but as you're trying to, make an engine perform, not so much. So all of these valve events are before or after top dead center. They're not at top dead center. So when we're looking at exhaust closing, how much gas is trapped in that cylinder? How many of the gases are trapped in that cylinder? How much pressure does it develop at a slow revolution, at a low RPM? So if you have, let's just use the basic standards. Say from 25 after up to say 50 after, okay? If it's 25 after after bottom dead center, if it's 25 after bottom dead center that the intake valve closes, then it's going to produce a pretty substantial amount of power in the low RPM. If it is 50 degrees after bottom dead center, then it's going to produce more power at the high RPM. And everything in between is in fact in between, okay? Now yes, there's camshafts that exist that are sooner than 25. There's camshafts that exist that are later than 50, okay? I'm not going to argue that. But that's kind of your standard window, okay? That's kind of your standard camshaft window. And everywhere in between there is chosen based on when it opened and when the exhaust opens and closes and so on and so on, okay? But if we look at it this way, if we're trying to avoid building a bad combo, in my opinion, if you're looking at an intake valve close at say 50 degrees or later, okay, and you're trying to run pump gas, you're going to want to be 12-to-1 compression or higher, okay? Now, some people will argue that. That's fine. Let them argue. You do it your way. This is how I do it. If you're in the 40-degree range or down to about 30, then yeah, 11-to-1 works out really well. Something in the 11s. Obviously higher in the 11s if we're later, and earlier, lower in the 11s if we're earlier. And if you're before 25, I would be a little cautious being any higher than 11-to-1. You're going to want to be something closer around 10 or 10 and a half. Okay, so now we can argue, debate, whatever as to how all this should be, but that's based on where I come up with it. Okay, that's just based on my experience as I do it. Now tuning has a lot to do with it. If your tuner isn't used to tuning things that are a little bit edgy, then you'll have to, soften that window. You have to make it a little lower compression. But just understand, it's going to produce power at a higher RPM if you do that. It's going to produce it at a more mid to high, or not produce any low at all, or whatever. But personally, I tune every day, all day, so I don't mind pushing those edges. I don't mind pushing to the edges. But again, that maybe isn't for everyone. But hopefully, that will give you guys some insight, some information on how to avoid bad combos. So anyhow, if you disagree, feel free to disagree, comment, whatever. I'm just telling you how I do it. And basically, think about it as the intake valve closing creates a hole. You fill that hole with compression. You fill it with pressure somehow, be it with compression by raising the compression. The later the valve closing event, the deeper the hole. So either fill it with compression or fill it with boost or whatever it is. But that's generally how I look at it. So, all right, y'all. Hopefully that helps. And y'all take care. Never forget what is important out there.